Imagine growing up in a home so violent you decide to take your chances living on the street. Imagine spending your evenings or spending your day studying hard, going to the local public library and studying there, and then walking back to your high school because it's the only place you have to call home. Imagine living in the dumpster for 6 months in the dead of winter. Imagine taking the cardboard out of one dumpster and putting it on the decomposing garbage of another so you have a warm place to sleep at night. Karina would sneak into the school and take a shower when she heard the janitors arrive, and she'd start her day. She knew in her gut that her education was her way out. She told herself every day, I can do this, I can do this. She studied hard. She dreamed about going to college. She never gave up. Karina graduated top of her class. She got a full scholarship to the University of Denver, and she graduated there in 4 years. Today, she owns her own home, she runs a small business, and she has an adorable little girl. In 2010, I set out on a journey to explore the power of story. Mario, my photographer, and I traveled from California to Mississippi to New York, meeting and interviewing ordinary people who had extraordinary stories. Like Karina, they had been through incredible circumstances, and some had just done some really amazing things in life. We called this project the Imagine Project because every one of these people found the courage to step beyond their story and imagine a new life for themselves. Imagine being on your way to the 1980 Olympics as a swimmer and diver, only to have your dreams shattered by President Carter's boycott. Imagine accomplishing a new dream and becoming a Navy pilot, escorting oil tankers through a war zone in the Persian Gulf. Imagine being called to fight a wildfire in the heat of an Arizona summer. Imagine your helicopter crashes. Over 50% of your body is burned. The doctors gave Jeff a 10% chance of survival. And when I was on my way to meet and interview Jeff, I was concerned about how I might react when I saw his face. As you can see, his face was badly burned, and I didn't want to embarrass him or me. But when Jeff opened that door, I didn't even see his scars. I just felt this big, bright, beautiful spirit that I just wanted to stand a little closer to. And when I asked Jeff, why do you think you survived? Jeff said, without skipping a beat, because I was supposed to. I was meant to be here. Today, Jeff has a beautiful family. He coaches collegiate athletes, and he's probably one of the most delightful people I've ever met. Imagine being 82 years old and losing your beloved wife of 50 years. Imagine going back to your tiny hometown of Gloucester and finding it's been devastated by the collapse of the coal mining industry. Imagine the houses are falling apart, the people depressed, their pride long gone. Imagine looking for some way to make a difference. So Jim went to the mayor and asked, well, how can I help? And the mayor said, well, you could paint the fire hydrants. So Jim went to the hardware store, got a can of paint, a paintbrush, and he painted all 7 of them. And then he painted a fence, and then he went and he knocked on a perfect stranger's door and asked if he could paint their house for free. Of course, they thought he was nuts, but who would turn down an offer like that? So he painted one, and then he painted another, and then another. And then busloads of volunteers showed up to help. At 83 years old, Jim and his volunteers have painted over 200 structures. Gloucester is a kaleidoscope of color. Their town feels brighter, the people feel happier. Gloucester's high school is the poorest high school in the state of Ohio. But for the last 2 years, they've gone to the state football championship. And if any of you are from Ohio or know anything about Ohio football, you know that is a big deal. These stories are part of the Imagine Project book that was published in 2013, my book. And they're all, challenging stories like the ones that I've told you. But what was fascinating about these people is that they still love life. They weren't celebrities, they weren't rich, they weren't famous. They loved life, celebrated life in spite of their circumstances. And the most common question I'm asked is, how on earth did you find these people? And I thought it was going to be difficult at first. So I started with folks that I knew. I read the paper, I watched TV, I talked to people when I traveled on vacation, and it didn't take long before I realized that everyone has a story. Everyone has at least one story that's powerful enough to define the way you live life. If you walk by someone on the street, or catch the eye of a stranger in the grocery store, or sit across from someone on the monorail, take a moment and wonder what their story might be. You'd never know that Charletta's 3-year-old son died in her arms after being struck by a stray bullet from a drive-by shooting. Charletta told me that she forgave her son's killer that night. She knew she had to, for everyone's sake. Now she travels and she works locally and nationally on restorative justice programs. Her son's shooter was only 16 when it happened, and now she visits him in prison. And she treats him with love and kindness, giving him hope that he too can have a better life someday. As you listen to Paul Thorne, the rhythm and blues singer-songwriter, you'd never know that he's severely dyslexic. He was told as a child that he would never amount to anything. And now he's famous. He spends every day doing something that he loves. Tyler was cycling on a backcountry road training for an Ironman competition, and his truck driver decided to play chicken with him and run him off the road. And it didn't take him long to recover from his physical injuries, but mentally, 18 months and 80 pounds later, he looked in the mirror and knew that he had to do something. So he packed his bags and he set out on a journey down the eastern seaboard, doing random acts of kindness for anybody that would let him. And when he reached mile marker 1, he knew in his heart that he had found himself again, all by doing random acts of kindness for people. The Imagine Project teaches 3 important lessons. The first is every stranger has a story. Unfortunately, we get so wrapped up in our own lives and our phones and thinking about what we have to do next, we don't typically give people a second thought. But what if we did? What if we stopped and listened? The stories will astound you. You see the stories behind the eyes of a camera. And sometimes you might even get to hear their real story. Which brings me to the second lesson: to be kind, to ask, to listen. The third lesson is everyone can overcome. I've told you some intense stories already about people who've persevered and overcome remarkable circumstances. And it's true. No matter what your story, you can persevere, you can overcome. It's life. Life brings us stories every day. No matter big or small or big, you can overcome too. My favorite story is Mackenzie was born weighing only 1 pound, 12 ounces. She was the size of a potato. Mackenzie was told, the doctors said that she may never walk. and her dad, my husband, said that she was going to be the next Peekaboo Street, the famous skier. And after spending years a step behind her peers, now she's a senior in college and she's about to embark on an incredible photography career. When I realized the power of telling your story using the word imagine, I decided to, I wondered if it would help kids and teens process their adversity. So I decided to create a 6-step journal, and it gives kids and teens a voice and a tool to cope with anything, big or small, that they might be dealing with. And I took it into schools. And as I travel across the country listening to the stories of our children, I continue to be amazed at how much they struggle in life. This is a story written by a young girl who's 13, and it's a window into the eyes of, the minds of our children. Imagine growing up in a world where you've been smart your whole life and expected to achieve and have higher expectations. Imagine growing up on the internet, having more internet friends than real life friends. Imagine not spending too much time on the internet and not enough time outside. Imagine being the only girl on the hockey team and scoring your first goal. The Imagine Project is now a nonprofit organization that gives kids and teens a voice for free. We have 4 journals available on our website. There's an adult journal, a teens journal, a kids journal, and a little ones journal. The little ones, ages kindergarten through 3rd grade, they don't have huge problems. They typically talk about, a friend being mean to them, moving, maybe even divorce. But in some communities, kids age 5 through 8 years old, they deal with poverty, abuse, sometimes even gangs. You can't imagine their stories. Ultimately, the Imagine Project is about writing a new story, giving kids an opportunity to let go of the old story and imagine an even better one. So in a group of kindergartners, I asked them, so if you could imagine anything in your life, what would it be? And one little girl, little 5-year-old, sweet, innocent little girl, raises her hand. She says, I'd imagine having 4 moms and 4 dads. So somebody'd always be there to pick me up from school every day. Now, she's probably not going to get the 4 moms and 4 dads, but imagine the shift in their family dynamics when the parents read that statement. Cameron is a young man who lives in a poor neighborhood, Montbello, in the Denver area. I'm from Denver. And he wrote his story for me when I went in to do a class. And he had been really angry and getting into trouble, throwing chairs and fighting with kids, picking fights. And he wrote his story, and when I asked for volunteers to read out loud, he didn't want to read his story, but he wanted me to read it. And as I read it, he sat with his head on his arms and his hoodie up, and I'll try to remember it as best I can. But imagine staying home, playing video games, and waiting for your dad to come home from the halfway house. Any day now. Imagine your mom coming home and telling you your dad's in the hospital. Imagine running to him in tears at his bedside. Imagine he's put into hospice. Imagine 3 weeks later, he's dead. Imagine going to his funeral and seeing all of his friends. Imagine wanting so badly to hold his ashes, but your mom says you're too young. Imagine the loneliness. Every child deserves to tell their story. If you walked by Cameron on the street, you wouldn't know his story, yet you can see something in his eyes. This is what you capture. You see something in his eyes. Is it pain? Is it pride? Is it joy? Is it anger? We don't really know. Yet he's given the opportunity to let go of his story and write a new story. So Cameron's dreams are, imagine being an astronomer. Imagine discovering a star that no one else has seen before. When I asked Cameron, I texted him a couple months after he wrote a story to make sure he was okay. And I said, how are you doing? And he said, I'm doing really well. And I said, really, do you think writing your story was helpful? And he said, it was majorly helpful. That's what he said. And I said, well, can you tell me why? And he said, because now I can talk about my feelings, and before I was just depressed. And I actually met his mom at the photo shoot. And he said, when I asked her, did you notice a difference after he wrote his story? And she said, well, he stood a little taller and he seemed like he matured a little bit. So, and now I can tell he feels better about himself. And I've got these stories. There's this other young man, Chase, who I don't have a picture of him, but I went down to an alternative high school and did this. And he sat with purple hair, long hair in his face and a hat on. His body posture was like this. And he wrote a story, and then he read his story out loud. And the next day when I came back, I said, even if you read it yesterday, I want you to read it again today. And he raised his hand. He said, well, I forgot my paper. And I said, well, he goes, but I think I can remember it. And he said it almost word for word. It was all about how his parents thought he was, a piece of crap. And he said it almost word for word. And I said, wow, did you study that? And he said, no, I just read it to my sister. And when he stood up and read it, he stood with pride. You could see his face, you could see his smile. And his imagined dreams were, imagine making somebody smile every day. He was funny. Photographs capture a moment in time, but their stories last forever. When we did Bucky's photo shoot for the book, he was struggling with a brain tumor. The doctors had given him 8 months to live. He survived another 3 years. Bucky's spirit, his positive attitude took him far beyond what we ever could imagine. And his face, his smile, his soul, his spirit is captured in this picture. A gift for his family and an inspiration for the rest of us. Everyone has a story. I invite you to think about your own. Maybe there's a story that's still holding you back, keeping you from what you might become. Write down your story. Experience this process. It's amazing. Start each sentence with the word imagine. And when you do, you never know, like Karina or Jeff, Jim, even Cameron. You might find something in yourself that you didn't even know existed. And when you do, anything is possible. And when you walk by someone on the street, remember, everyone has a story. Thank you.